Tonight, a lot of news on the impeachment front, and we've got a slew of guests to talk about it. Former Senator Byron Dorgan, he'll join us to discuss how this compares to the Clinton impeachment, and also former Republican Governor of New Jersey, Chrissy Todd Whitman. She'll weigh in on how her party is behaving. Spoiler alert, the governor's not happy. Then we get the inside scoop on the politics of impeachment from ABC News political director Rick Klein. Also, two Washington Post reporters out with a new book with stunning details, the arrogance, the ignorance of a commander-in-chief. It's a page-turner, and we've got a sneak preview for you tonight. Evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. Thank you for joining us this Thursday. I'm Richard French. Well, it was a historic day in American history. For just the third time in our nation's 243-year history, an impeachment trial for the President of the United States. It is underway as we speak in the U.S. Senate.
Do you solemnly swear that in all things appertaining to the trial of the impeachment of Donald John Trump, President of the United States, now pending, you will do impartial justice according to the Constitution and laws, so help you God?
All right, for the details plus all the pomp and circumstance, let's bring in our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman.
Rich, we saw a lot of things in the Senate today that we just don't see very often. This is the formal trial, impeachment trial of President Trump began today. It started just after noon as the House impeachment managers entered the Senate, and the lead manager, Congressman Adam Schiff, read the two articles of impeachment to the full Senate. He concluded his reading with this.
He will remain a threat to national security and the Constitution if allowed to remain in office, and has acted in a manner grossly incompatible with self-governance and the rule of law. President Trump thus warrants impeachment and trial, removal from office, and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States.
2 hours later, Chief Justice John Roberts entered the chamber and was sworn in to preside over the trial by Chuck Grassley, the President pro tem of the Senate. Roberts then swore in the senators, who, after taking the oath in mass, were all called up to the desk of the Senate clerk to sign their names in an oath book, another pledge for each of them to do, in the words of their oath, impartial justice according to the Constitution and laws. And that was the extent of the formal impeachment action in the Senate. Chief Justice Roberts closed the session shortly after. The trial will resume at 1 p.m. on Tuesday. Now, aside from those formalities, not a lot of movement, at least not in public, on any of the big issues still hanging over the impeachment trial. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell announced timelines for the House and the President to file trial briefs. The House will get a chance to rebut anything that comes from the President before the trial starts on Tuesday, but nothing about trial length or witnesses or really just about anything else. Schiff, as impeachment manager, said he would consider calling or trying to call indicted Giuliani aide Lev Parnas as a witness. Parnas has been dropping a ton of relevant evidence in recent days. We'll have more on that coming up later on in the hour. As for the president, the Washington Post is reporting Trump now wants a fast trial with no witnesses, perhaps as quick as 2 weeks or less. For the record, the trial of Andrew Johnson lasted 11 weeks, and the trial of Bill Clinton took more than a month. After the proceedings closed for the day, we began getting reaction from some key players. Chuck Schumer says this whole thing makes him angry.
For an American president to deliberately solicit such a thing, to blackmail a foreign country with military assistance to help them win an election, is unimaginably worse. I am actually filled with anger when you read the attempt to subvert our democracy.
The president also spoke this afternoon, and other than denying that he knows Lev Parnas, despite multiple photos and videos of the two of them together, everything else that Trump said was stuff that he's already said and that you've already heard him say about impeachment, so we won't repeat it here. Rich?
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. I want to bring in our first guest, former Senator Byron Dorgan, Democrat from North Dakota, a man who's been through impeachment before as he was in the Democratic leadership during the Clinton trial. Senator, thanks again for making time for us. I appreciate it.
No, I'm happy to do it, of course.
Before we get into where this may proceed, talk about what I would assume, even with all the partisanship that wasn't new, certainly back in the late 90s, is there a gravity when, as a senator, you have to sign that oath book, as you know that you're not only an eyewitness to history, but that you're literally talking about a future of a presidency?
Yeah, I think everybody understands this is not an ordinary thing to do. It's not an ordinary time. Impeachment rarely happens. When it does, you sign an oath to be impartial, and you know, it is a constitutional provision that allows the impeachment process to proceed, and it's about removing a president from office. I mean, that's a pretty significant issue, obviously. So I've often called it a joyless U.S. Senate chamber during that period. There's no joy in doing this.
But with what would be a sober and obviously a historical task, it seems that a few members of the Senate and people that you served with in the past have already made their judgment before the trial has even begun. And for my audience's sake, let me just bring a couple. Obviously, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and also Lindsey Graham.
Everything I do during this, I'm coordinating with White House counsel. There will be no difference between the president's position and our position as to how to handle this to the extent that we can.
I'm not trying to hide the fact that I have disdain for the accusations in the process, so I don't need any witnesses. I am ready to vote on the underlying articles. I don't really need to hear a lot of witnesses.
Now, Senator, I could play 20 clips of Lindsey Graham then and now. I mean, it's, you know, you can't recognize him. He was your Judge Advocate General, for crying out loud, at one point, so certainly the man knows the rule of law. That all said, do you think there's even, from just a purely tactical, forget about ethical, do you think there's a little bit of regret on the part of the Republicans that they were so transparent in the beginning that they weren't going to really consider the facts here and that they're going to work with the White House, that this wasn't really a search for the truth?
Well, it doesn't sound like they have an understanding of the responsibility that they have when they sign this oath. It's very strange. You know, and there's a big difference in impeachment processes. 20 years ago, the Senate, when it started an impeachment process, had all of the information. They had all of the documents, all of the witnesses under oath in front of grand juries, and it was because Kenneth Starr had done that over 3.5 years. And so that was a circumstance in the last impeachment trial. In this impeachment trial, it's very different in that the president decided they're not going to get any documents, and he didn't want any of his close aides to be testifying. And so, you know, there's going to have to be some witnesses at this trial, otherwise it could hardly be called a trial. And frankly, I'm surprised by Senator McConnell and Senator Graham suggesting somehow let's just get this over with and get it over with quickly. I mean, that's what the president says, and apparently Senator McConnell is willing to work with him to do that, but that is not doing justice to what the Constitution requires of them.
You know, I think sometimes we always overcomplicate this in that we've entered a bizarre world where, you know, John Bolton is a very significant witness to this. He's already said he's willing to talk just to subpoena him. He was a man in the room. You don't have to worry about second or third hand accounts. The same theoretically would apply to Mick Mulvaney, to Pompeo, to an official over at the OMB. But yet we're about to decide the fate of a presidency, and it seems unlikely at this point we're going to hear from really relevant players. That doesn't seem to be, I think, to the general public, a logical way to come to an informed decision. But yet politically, it seems that's more likely than not going to happen. Do you think that before this is said and done, we will hear from these witnesses or not?
Well, there is the drip these days. You saw the interviews that have been held in the last 24 hours by one of the Giuliani associates, who says everyone understood exactly what was going on, and that Donald Trump and Giuliani and others were fully informed and fully executing the plan that came out of the White House. You know, if you could just have like maybe 1.5 gallons of truth serum and start administering it in the right places and get the truth of exactly what was happening and what was done, I think people would be horrified. If you go back to the center of this arrangement or this impeachment process, it is a president on the phone with the president of another country saying, you know, I want you to announce the investigation of someone who will likely be my political rival here in the United States. And if you don't, you may not get the money that you need for your country. If you do, you may get it. I mean, if you don't, you'll get penalized. If you do, you get rewarded. So, I mean, I think most people would be pretty horrified to understand exactly what was done here and who engineered it.
just taking a couple of today's headlines under the umbrella of we're supposed to have co-equal branches of government. The legislative branch is supposed to be that check and balance, and yet we hear a headline today that the Intel Department is asking Congress not to have public hearings about national security threats because it could upset the president. And with the Maria Yovanovitch surveillance story that's out there now, we have the Ukrainians that are doing an investigation and not the U.S. government, not even a word from the State Department or from Secretary Pompeo about what sounded like a conversation about a possible hit on a U.S. ambassador. At what point does the Senate say, we can't, hand over everything to the executive branch? We have a job here to do, and part of our job is to make sure that they act in the best interest of America.
Well, I think the people you mentioned are enablers for the president's behavior, unfortunately, and that's not what they're supposed to be. The Attorney General is the Attorney General for the people in this country, not for the president. And the State Department, you would expect every Secretary of State, any Secretary of State, under any condition, would stand up for the interests of U.S. ambassadors serving abroad. These are wonderful people who risk their lives, and they deserve the support that Pompeo is not now giving. And, let me mention on the intelligence side of things, I know what the president is upset about. It's pretty obvious. The press has reported it. The head of the CIA came to the Congress, and the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency came to the Congress, and they told the truth. And they said, that doesn't appear to be that North Korea is going to give up its nuclear weapons. And they went through a whole series of things that represented the truth as they saw it. And the president doesn't want that. And so he called him to the Oval Office and said, get it straight. And so then they put out information saying, well, we were misquoted or this or that. But I think that the House and the Senate have demonstrated an unwillingness to stand up for their own interests. They are a co-equal branch of government, co-equal. Senator Robert Byrd used to say, I don't serve under presidents, I serve with presidents. We are a co-equal branch of government. And I think too many people have forgotten that.
When this impeachment trial is done, do you think that the American public, whether it be some of the witnesses, maybe depositions of some of the folks we talked about or not, will we as a public, do you believe, have the full story, and will senators be able to make an informed decision?
I don't know the answer to that. And, we are in the period of social media these days. In the last impeachment trial 20 years ago, there wasn't yet a smartphone, which is interesting. But now we're in the age of smartphones and social media. And I saw the other day that someone said they had been asked by someone whether the Democrats had asked that flags be flown at half-mast for Soleimani, General Soleimani. I mean, there's so much misinformation out there, so much misinformation. I really worry. You just can't have your own set of facts. Facts ought to be facts. And I worry about how we can begin to bring this country together and respect each other's views, but also all of us work off the same set of facts about what has happened and what we need to do to put this country back on track.
Well, certainly truth has taken a beating the last 3 years, but Senator, I appreciate you making time for us tonight. Thank you so much.
Oh, hey, thank you very much.
All right, everyone, when we come back, we're going to discuss the politics of impeachment and what's going on behind the scenes on Capitol Hill today. We'll be joined by ABC News political director Rick Klein.